History's most brutal torture method. What if one of history's greatest lies wasn't told with words, but with pain? For thousands of years, kings, emperors, judges, and religious authorities believed that suffering could reveal the truth. Entire civilizations accepted the idea that pain could force honesty, expose conspiracies, and protect nations from hidden enemies. But what if everything they believed was wrong? According to research from Amnesty International and historical studies published by the British Library, torture has been used by governments for thousands of years across many civilizations. Modern research, however, has shown that information obtained under extreme pain is often unreliable because people may confess simply to make the suffering stop. That single realization changed the course of legal history. Yet for centuries, rulers across the world continued to believe that fear was stronger than justice. And one of history's darkest secrets was not the devices themselves. It was the belief that ordinary people could be transformed into enemies through nothing more than suspicion. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and let me know in the comments which period of history fascinates you the most. Ancient Rome, medieval Europe, ancient Egypt, the Mongol Empire, or another civilization. I read every comment, and I genuinely enjoy hearing your thoughts. Now imagine yourself standing inside a courthouse nearly 3,000 years ago. The room is silent. Stone walls surround you. Officials sit behind wooden tables. Scribes patiently record every word spoken. A frightened prisoner stands before powerful men who believe the fate of the kingdom may depend upon a confession. Outside, ordinary life continues. Merchants open their shops. Children play in narrow streets. Farmers work distant fields. Yet inside this room, another battle is taking place. Not a battle fought with swords. A battle fought through fear. The truth was far more complicated. Human societies have always struggled with the same difficult question. How do you discover the truth when evidence is limited? Long before modern forensic science, fingerprints, DNA analysis, or surveillance cameras existed, investigators often relied upon eyewitnesses, rumors, or confessions. Confessions quickly became the most valued form of evidence. If someone admitted guilt, many believed the case was solved. But what happened when the accused refused to confess? Throughout history, many governments concluded that stronger methods were justified. Their reasoning seemed simple. An innocent person would surely remain truthful. A guilty person would eventually admit the crime. Today, we know that assumption was deeply flawed. Modern psychology demonstrates that overwhelming fear and suffering can cause innocent people to confess to acts they never committed. Yet ancient societies had no such understanding. What happened next shaped centuries of legal history. Some of the earliest written legal traditions emerged in Mesopotamia. The famous Code of Hammurabi established detailed punishments for many crimes, emphasizing order and authority. While not every investigation involved torture, maintaining public order became one of the highest priorities for rulers. As civilizations expanded, legal systems grew increasingly complex. Ancient Egypt valued justice through the principle of ma'at, balance, order, and truth. Officials investigated crimes ranging from theft to corruption. Written records suggest that severe punishments could accompany serious offenses, particularly those viewed as threats to the state. Farther west, another civilization developed a legal tradition that would influence the world for centuries: ancient Rome. The Roman Republic valued law as one of the foundations of civilization. Citizens possessed important legal protections, yet those protections did not always extend equally to everyone. Status mattered enormously. Citizens, non-citizens, enslaved people, and prisoners could face very different treatment under Roman law. Historians still debate this today. How consistently were legal standards actually applied across the vast Roman world? The answer likely varied depending on time, place, and political circumstances. But this was only the beginning. As Rome expanded into a massive empire, new challenges emerged: rebellions, political conspiracies, military revolts, assassination plots. Emperors feared hidden enemies. Governors feared unrest. Information became power, and obtaining that information became increasingly important. Imagine serving as an investigator responsible for protecting the emperor. A conspiracy is rumored. Several suspects have been arrested. No physical evidence exists. Witnesses contradict one another. Every passing day increases political pressure. The emperor demands answers. The temptation to force a confession becomes overwhelming. This pattern repeated itself throughout history. Whether in imperial courts, medieval kingdoms, or religious tribunals, fear often encouraged authorities to seek certainty where little actually existed. One lesser-known fact reveals how fragile many historical confessions truly were. In numerous documented cases, different suspects confessed to completely contradictory versions of the same alleged conspiracy. Each confession appeared convincing. Each implicated different people. Modern historians recognize that many such admissions reflected desperation rather than truth. Pain did not necessarily reveal facts. It often produced whatever answer investigators most wanted to hear. The truth was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Fear could manufacture evidence. As centuries passed, Europe entered the Middle Ages. Political authority fragmented. Kingdoms rose and fell. Religious influence expanded dramatically. Courts increasingly viewed crimes not merely as offenses against rulers, but also against God. Heresy became one of the most feared accusations. Unlike ordinary theft or violence, heresy threatened both spiritual salvation and political stability. Authorities believed that false beliefs could spread through entire communities like disease. Stopping them became an urgent priority. Imagine living in a medieval town. Church bells echo across narrow streets. Everyone knows one another. Faith shapes every aspect of daily life. Then whispers begin. Someone has questioned accepted beliefs. Someone has attended suspicious meetings. Someone may secretly belong to a forbidden movement. Rumors spread faster than facts. Soon, officials arrive. Neighbors begin watching one another. Trust quietly disappears. What happened next shocked entire kingdoms. Across different parts of Europe, rulers and religious authorities established specialized courts to investigate serious religious offenses. Their purpose was not simply punishment. It was preserving religious unity. At least, that was how they understood their mission. The methods varied across regions and centuries. Popular culture often exaggerates or confuses many details. Historians continue separating myth from documented evidence. Some famous stories originated centuries after the events themselves. Others remain supported by surviving court records. One of the greatest challenges for modern historians is distinguishing historical reality from later legend. This is especially true when discussing institutions whose reputations became symbols of fear. By the late medieval period, legal procedures became increasingly formalized. Judges kept detailed records. Witnesses testified. Written documentation expanded. Ironically, these same records now allow historians to reconstruct how many investigations actually unfolded. Thousands of manuscripts survive. Together, they reveal something unexpected. The greatest weapon was often not physical punishment. It was psychological fear. Many suspects confessed before any harsher measures were ever considered simply because they believed resistance was hopeless. Authorities understood that uncertainty itself could become a powerful tool. A prison cell, silence, isolation, not knowing what tomorrow might bring. Sometimes imagination proved even more frightening than reality. But no institution would become more closely associated with fear than the one established in Spain during the late 15th century. Its name would survive for centuries. Its reputation would become legendary. Its legacy would forever shape how the world remembers justice, power, and authority. And what happened after its creation would make the history of torture, and the history of law itself, far more complicated than anyone expected. The institution that would come to symbolize fear more than almost any other in European history was the Spanish Inquisition. For centuries, its name alone has evoked images of dark courtrooms, secret accusations, and lives forever changed by suspicion. Yet, separating historical fact from legend is not always easy. Popular culture has often portrayed the Spanish Inquisition as an institution driven entirely by unimaginable brutality. The historical record tells a more complicated story. Established in 1478 under the authority of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the Inquisition's primary purpose was to investigate baptized Christians suspected of secretly practicing another faith. Its greatest weapon was not always physical punishment, it was fear. Imagine living in a Spanish town at the end of the 15th century. Church bells echo through narrow streets. Market stalls fill with merchants and travelers. Life appears peaceful. Then a rumor begins. Someone claims a respected neighbor secretly follows forbidden religious practices. No evidence is presented publicly. No witnesses step forward openly. Yet suspicion alone is enough to change everything. Within days, the accused disappears into custody. Friends avoid speaking about the family. Business partners quietly distance themselves. Entire communities begin questioning one another. Fear spreads faster than certainty. What happened next shocked everyone. Investigators gathered testimony from multiple witnesses. Written records filled shelves inside tribunal offices. Scribes carefully documented every question and every answer. The Spanish Inquisition became one of the most thoroughly documented judicial systems of its era. Ironically, these records now allow historians to study its procedures in remarkable detail. Modern researchers have discovered that many cases ended without execution. Some defendants were acquitted. Others performed public acts of penance. Many received fines, imprisonment, or exile. This does not erase the suffering caused by the institution. Rather, it reminds us that history is often more complex than popular myths suggest. Historians still debate this today. Exactly how many people lost their lives? Estimates have changed dramatically as new archival evidence has emerged. Most modern scholars believe earlier claims of hundreds of thousands of executions were greatly exaggerated. Even so, thousands of lives were permanently altered by investigations, confiscations of property, imprisonment, forced confessions, and public humiliation. The psychological impact extended far beyond official punishments. Imagine never knowing whether a private conversation might later become evidence against you. Imagine carefully choosing every word spoken at family gatherings. Imagine wondering whether a neighbor's smile concealed suspicion. Entire communities learned to live cautiously. One lesser-known fact illustrates this atmosphere. Some families abandoned long-standing cultural traditions, not because they were illegal, but because they feared ordinary customs might be misunderstood. Fear gradually reshaped everyday life. The truth was far more complicated. Spain was not alone. Across Europe, kingdoms faced religious conflict unlike anything previously experienced. In 1517, Martin Luther challenged established church practices. His ideas spread rapidly across the continent. The Protestant Reformation divided Europe into competing religious camps. Catholic rulers feared Protestant influence. Protestant rulers feared Catholic conspiracies. Religious identity became deeply connected to political loyalty. Governments increasingly viewed disagreement as a potential threat to national security. Throughout Europe, various courts investigated alleged conspiracies, heresy, and religious dissent. Fear became international. Meanwhile, another phenomenon swept across many European communities: the witch trials. Today, many people imagine witches as fictional characters. For people living in the 16th and 17th centuries, accusations of witchcraft often seemed terrifyingly real. Crop failures, disease outbreaks, sudden storms, unexplained deaths. Communities desperately searched for explanations. Sometimes fear focused upon vulnerable individuals, elderly widows, social outsiders, people already viewed with suspicion. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of people across Europe were prosecuted for witchcraft between the 15th and 18th centuries. Many were innocent. Many confessed under enormous psychological pressure. What happened next shocked entire villages. Neighbors testified against neighbors. Families turned against one another. Old disputes resurfaced. Simple misunderstandings evolved into criminal accusations. Modern historians recognize recurring patterns. Periods of social uncertainty frequently produced waves of suspicion. Economic hardship, religious conflict, political instability, all increased the likelihood of accusations. Fear became contagious. One accusation inspired another, then another. Soon entire communities found themselves trapped in cycles of suspicion. But this was only the beginning. By the 17th century, something unexpected began happening. Philosophers, scientists, lawyers, judges, even some religious leaders started asking uncomfortable questions. What if forced confessions were unreliable? What if innocent people admitted crimes they had never committed simply to escape unbearable circumstances? These questions challenged centuries of accepted legal practice. Evidence gradually replaced assumption. Observation replaced superstition. Reason began replacing fear. Thinkers of the Enlightenment argued that justice should rely upon facts rather than forced admissions. Among the most influential voices was Cesare Beccaria, whose writings argued that torture was both unjust and ineffective because it punished the weak while rewarding those able to endure suffering longer. His ideas spread across Europe. Governments slowly began reforming their legal systems. What seemed unquestionable for centuries suddenly faced growing criticism. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this documentary, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue creating cinematic documentaries exploring history's greatest mysteries, forgotten civilizations, and defining moments. Because the greatest twist in this story wasn't how torture was used. It was how the world eventually realized that fear could never replace justice, and that realization would transform legal systems forever. The greatest turning point in the history of torture did not begin on a battlefield. It did not begin inside a royal palace, and it did not begin in a prison cell. It began with an idea that challenged thousands of years of accepted belief. What if pain could never produce justice? For centuries, rulers had assumed that suffering would expose the truth. Confessions were treated as the strongest form of evidence, and many legal systems were built around that assumption. But during the 18th century, a growing number of philosophers, judges, and legal scholars reached a very different conclusion. The truth was far more complicated. A frightened person would often say whatever they believed their captors wanted to hear. A false confession could appear just as convincing as a truthful one. If that was true, then an entire system of justice rested on an unreliable foundation. One of the most influential critics was Cesare Beccaria. In his landmark work on Crimes and Punishments, published in 1764, Beccaria argued that punishment should be based on evidence, proportion, and fairness, not forced confessions or cruelty. His ideas spread rapidly across Europe. Kings read them, judges debated them, lawmakers discussed them. What had once seemed normal was now being questioned, and what happened next changed legal history forever. During the Age of Enlightenment, governments slowly began reforming their criminal justice systems. Some countries restricted the use of judicial torture, others abolished it entirely. Legal investigations increasingly relied on witness testimony, written evidence, and more structured courtroom procedures. The transformation did not happen overnight. Old habits were difficult to break. Some governments resisted change for decades, others adopted reforms more quickly. But the direction of history had shifted. Justice was beginning to move away from fear and toward evidence. Imagine a courtroom 200 years after the medieval period. Instead of demanding a confession at any cost, judges ask for documents. Witnesses are questioned publicly. Evidence is examined carefully. Lawyers challenge accusations. The legal process is far from perfect, but it reflects a profound change in thinking. The goal is no longer simply to obtain a confession. The goal is to discover the truth. One lesser-known fact highlights how powerful this transformation became. Many countries rewrote their criminal codes during the 18th and 19th centuries, removing legal procedures that had existed for centuries. Ideas once considered radical gradually became accepted principles of justice. The influence of these reforms spread far beyond Europe. As modern legal systems developed around the world, concepts such as due process, the presumption of innocence, and the right to a fair trial became increasingly important. These principles are now regarded as essential foundations of justice in many nations. Historians still debate this today. How much did Enlightenment philosophy alone change legal systems? How much resulted from political revolutions, social change, and scientific progress? The answer is likely a combination of all these forces. History rarely changes because of a single event. It changes because ideas, circumstances, and people converge over time. The story of torture is therefore not simply a story about punishment. It is a story about power. Throughout history, governments often believed that extraordinary threats justified extraordinary measures. Wars, political conspiracies, religious conflicts, rebellions. Each generation faced moments when fear tempted leaders to abandon established principles. Sometimes they succeeded in resisting that temptation. Sometimes they did not. That pattern continues to interest historians because it reminds us that every society faces difficult choices during periods of crisis. How do you protect public safety while preserving justice? How do you investigate serious crimes without sacrificing fundamental rights? These questions remain relevant today. One of the most fascinating aspects of this history is how often ordinary people found themselves caught between competing forces they could not control. Many were not powerful nobles or famous rulers. They were merchants, farmers, craftsmen, teachers, parents. Their lives changed because they happened to live during times of political uncertainty or religious conflict. History is often remembered through the actions of kings and generals, yet its greatest lessons are frequently found in the experiences of ordinary people. Perhaps the greatest irony is this. Many governments genuinely believed they were protecting society. They believed severe measures would preserve order. Yet modern research consistently shows that justice built upon fear is often unreliable. Fear can silence truth just as easily as it can reveal it. That realization transformed criminal law across much of the world. Today, historians study these chapters of history not to celebrate suffering, but to understand how legal systems evolved. The past reminds us that progress is rarely inevitable. Every reform required individuals willing to question long-standing traditions. Every improvement demanded courage. Every advance in justice began with someone asking whether there might be a better way. That is why the history of torture remains so important. It reveals not only humanity's capacity for cruelty, but also its capacity to learn, adapt, and change. The journey from fear to fairness took centuries. It was incomplete. It was imperfect. But it reshaped the relationship between governments and the people they serve. The greatest legacy of this history is not found in old prisons or forgotten courtrooms. It is found in the principles that many modern legal systems now strive to uphold. Evidence over suspicion, fair trials over forced confessions, justice over fear. Those ideas changed the world forever. If you've enjoyed this documentary and want to explore more forgotten chapters of history, legendary civilizations, and the events that shaped our world, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new documentary. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which historical legal reform do you think had the greatest impact on the modern world, and why? Let me know in the comments below. I read every comment and I'd love to hear your perspective.